rejoindre pour sa dernière
Now
table
I'm
ronde
calling
Aïssa
upon
Toussal, qui est chef
Aïssa
de la cellule
Toussal.
informatique
She's the head of
du
the
ministère de la
of
Santé
IT
et de
at the
l'Action
Senegal
sociale du
Ministry of Health
Sénégal.
and Social Action.
Venez, prenez place à mes côtés.
Take a seat. Faizu Itzwan Mustafa from Mali. I told you we have people from the world over. He's a consultant public health physician and in charge of non-communicable diseases at the Ministry of Health in Malaysia. Sheikh Umar Bagayoko is a professor of medical informatics. He's the founder of Inter-University degree in e-health innovation. And Jai Ganesh Udayasankaran from India is a member, is a senior manager in information technology, is also a consultant in the governing committee of Asia e-health information network. Now, Mustafa, the first question is for you. How can we transition from capacity building, from strategy to action? So who are those leaders and what's their role?
Thank you very much to the organizers for the opportunity, and thank you very much, Lionel, for the question. When we talk about capacity building, especially in digital health, it is easy to forget about the other supporting environment, as it were. Specifically, I like to talk about leadership and advocacy. A lot of times, a lot of digital health initiative is driven by champions. And when you do that, you risk when the champion leaves, your project will lead a natural death. And in addition, a lot of times, even in Malaysia, a lot of people come and show you a lot of digital health initiatives or projects. I use the word very nice, shiny toys. And if you don't have a strong leadership in your organization, it's so easy to get lost among these various toys. So we go back. I apologize, Lionel. One step back. I've heard several times people talking about a general strategy on digital health. I use the word digital health. And I've seen a lot of digital health strategies incorporating capacity building within them. What I feel is more important for a country is to have your strategy for learning for the whole healthcare provider. Otherwise, you risk the digital health becoming another silo. I relate to the work that I do in non-communicable diseases, NCD. Previously, we had your diabetes, hypertension, stroke, mental health, and each one wants to have its own capacity building, its own resources. Whereas for NCD, it is because of the shared risk factors, you need to tackle it as a whole. It's the same for digital health, actually, because it is supporting so many other programs. And my focus right now is on how digital health can support the change of the population behaviors when it comes to addressing NCD risk factors, unhealthy eating, physical inactivity, smoking. While the government, I work for the ministry, have a responsibility for policy and regulatory interventions, but sometimes it's not popular. For those of you who work in government, it's not easy. Whereas I like to introduce the word nudges. There is this theory called nudge, right, in behavioral economics. Digital health actually provides quite a good leverage. If you can leverage nudge into a lot of digital health informations. Anyway, I'll stop there first.
Non, c'est passionnant. On comprend aussi toute la difficulté lorsqu'on a une stratégie
Well, no, it's passionating. It's all very nice and well to have beautiful speeches and to have beautiful wordings on paper, but then you have to really translate that in practice. So you really need to have changes also at the government level. So how do you perform in Malaysia to try and spot the right actors, the right activists, the ones who will be good at talking about health and able to sometimes change behaviors, especially in a context where people are reluctant to change? How do you spot them? How do you train them?
So let's talk about developing the capacity of healthcare providers, the next generation of the leaders. I'll just focus on that bit. You have rightly pointed out, a lot of us work with strategic documents. You have national strategic plan for X, for Y, for Z. While people may say it is just a nice thing to look.
Oh, sorry.
All right. Oh, I think it's okay. Nice thing to look. You still need a document to get people together. I think it is like this event. I see this event as advocacy, getting people together. It is just the first step, but I think it's a very necessary first step. You need something written, something that you can share with others so that others can see where you are going with your work. For leadership within Ministry of Health, it is not specific for digital health. It is specific for looking at the mid-level, people younger than me. I'm already 48, so I'm looking somebody even younger than me, the next generation. It is somewhat an semi-formal arrangements because you have to work within the organizational structure of not just MOH, of the government. Yeah, I think I need to swap this.
Change the microphone.
Within the current organizational structure of the public service in Malaysia, it is not possible to do the ideal. The ideal would be I would be able to handpick people, put them where I like them to be, and then they will be the next generation of leaders. I'm working within current structure. Once you have that, we have a syllabus right now. Again, it is not a very tight syllabus like a university, because it is to cater for people who are working. But there are certain projects, certain milestones that you have to achieve, and you have to present to a committee of your senior peers. And part of that is digital health, various aspects.
Docteur Moustapha, comme ça fait plusieurs fois que vous utilisez le mot de next generation, la génération qui suit.
You have mentioned next generation. Is it something that has to do with age?
On ne peut pas changer les dirigeants.
It's impossible to change the current generation, but you can prepare for the next generation. So, grey hair, are we waiting for grey hair to go away and to get black hair, dark hair, to be more present in ministries? Is it just a question of age? Is it just a question of generation?
Can you ask me a more difficult question? When it comes to my work, again, changing behavior. Some people say you can't teach old dogs new trick. It's in English. It is not easy to change behavior, but it is also not easy to change the behavior of organizations. Organizations don't like change, people don't like change. Even the simple fact of introducing an electronic medical record we have experienced in a health clinic, despite showing how it eases the work, people are very, very reluctant until you have a champion. Once you have that champion, things sort of roll. So I'm not saying it's a factor of age, but if you, for example, only leading that organization for 1 or 2 years, it is very difficult to affect change. After 1 or 2 years, you retire. You need the next level of leaders to change. Again, for my work with non-communicable diseases, I'm almost giving up with the adult population, actually. I'm trying to target the school-going children now, that next generation, to change behavior. Because a lot of behaviors is related to behavior of parents. Children see what you do, not what you say. And if we teach something, don't drink soft drinks in school, we teach them, you go back, the parents, after work, just lie down, don't want to do any exercise, you see the fridge. But anyway, I'm diverting. So I'm almost giving up on adults. For non-communicable diseases, I think I just need a strong government to just regulate. Well, that's a very radical view. But anyway, it's the same with organizations. We need to work at the mid-level, and we hope we can groom them to be the next level, especially for digital health.
Et je vous rassure, Dr Moustapha, tout ce que vous dites n'est pas...
Well, everything you said, does not only apply in Malaysia, it does apply in the territory in which we talk currently. Now, a few minutes ago, we discussed about the degree in e-health. We saw a technician, we saw a healthcare professional. They discussed very concretely what they learned, business plan, new technologies, new ways of caring for people. In your platform, EHIN, you try to train those promoters, those champions of e-health. You also have trainings on lobbying, right? You teach them how to perform advocacy. And why do you think this training is important for future leaders?
Perhaps I would give Jai to respond to that, will be better. Right?
Ça s'appelle refiler le bébé à son voisin en français.
Well, that's a good way of transmitting the hot question to Jay when you don't want to answer. That was a nice trick from you.
As a regional network, it has its own scope for capacity building. I look capacity as something not a single stop effort. It's a continuum. And within that context, so when the context changes, of course, the scope for capacity also changes, and then it keeps evolving. So I can talk in terms of an individual as well as an institution, because I represent an institution which is a public charitable trust, which has been a leading adopter of health IT in India. So we have done this capacity building. In fact, we are doing it on a regular basis. That's on an institutional side. And because the question is on EHIN, I will answer that part first. So one of the pillars, strategic pillars of EHIN is capacity building. So we have been offering courses, the training programs for various health IT standards, then governance, and then recently, next month, we are offering a training program on project management methodologies in Malaysia. So our approach is more towards the specific needs from the ministries of health as expressed by them. We typically expect or approach the ministries of health, the e-health focal points, and then ask them what are their priority needs, and then tailor our training or capacity building efforts in the region based on those needs. So that's very specific to probably the country context. In some cases, it can also be common across the countries. So we usually get them all together and then deliver. And there is a very special effect of this kind of a regional approach is the peer learning. So we are all peers. Some of them are ministries of health officials. Some of them are practitioners, doctors, engineers. So when we all come together, each one actually gives probably a different flavor. So when we are learning, actually we also learn from each other. So that is the kind of an environment, a kind of a blended learning and a network-based learning, which EHIN gives the value. So for the EHIN question, that's my answer. If you want me to answer on the institutional plan,
c'est ce que j'allais vous demander.
Thank you.
La réponse sur l'intérêt
I also
d'enseigner
wanted to
du
have
lobbying,
your
et ça veut dire
take
quoi
of
cet enseignement
whether it's
concrètement?
interesting to teach lobbying as well.
Okay, it's like this. Learning, I would say, in a little philosophically talking, it's for life. Learning goes on for life. And then they also say that the reward for good work is more work. So if I need to learn something, if I pick up something, probably world will also expect me to do something more. So it is it also based on the work culture of each individual or collectively as an organization. So if I need to learn, we need to see what is in it. Each person looks for what is in it for them. whether it's a recognition in their career or any certification, or it translates into something more tangible like more pay or anything else, or just a pure joy of doing something new. That category is not very prevalent, but at the same time, this works. A simple recognition or what is in it for me. So in an institutional scenario like my own organization, where we run the hospitals, the colleges, and rural welfare projects, like specific to digital health situations in our hospitals, we actually look for user champions in each of the departments. Basically in the clinical side, we look forward whether it's a DNB, means the resident, because the residents are usually the younger lot. Coming back to what Dr. Faisal was mentioning, so they are the people who are already growing up in the age of iPhone or iPads, and they are more comfortable. And then if we teach them the how to do the digital transactions, for example, when you're using hospital information system, how to place an order for a lab test or a radiology, they are very quick to pick up. And once they pick up, we see how well they do. And then we actually designate them as user champions in the departments. And then they become the nodal training or orientation leads within their own department. Sometimes it is good to learn from my own colleagues or my own seniors, rather than some IT department calling you for a meeting, training, and having to go through. So this works. And we also have some specific modules. I would say that we have a video recording of most frequently used transactions. This is for the new staff who is joining, because at a nursing level, usually the attrition is higher, because usually nurses stay on for about maybe 1.5 to 2 hours, 2 years, and then they get a very good opportunity abroad. And then, so this attrition rate is faster. So we have some programs where after a face-to-face training, they also get to actually go back, and at their leisure, they can open the transaction. Basically, it shows like, how to place an order, how to retrieve the results, how to view and how to report. These are transactions on, say, hospital information systems or imaging, which we have recorded and made it available for them to refer.
Dans cette montée en compétences que vous nous décrivez, Jay, qui suppose effectivement de
So in this
des
strengthening, in this capacity building, you select champion, you select people showing the way, and also you do empowerment. So you try to include people, you try to motivate people every step of the way, because we know that it's difficult to change people. Do you have a specific strategy with health workers, with nurses? Because those people, they have habits, and it's difficult to change habits and behaviors for physicians, nurses, especially in big hospitals. How can you trigger change in such settings?
It's a challenging process. It takes time. In our experience, we have found probably nurses can be trained in groups, and while physicians, especially the senior physicians, would prefer one-to-one. Because I think it also relates to their proficiency or comfortable, the level of comfort that they have, how to use a computer or computing transactions, and then of course their time. So we have devised our training program like that. So we usually give the preference to the senior doctors, asking them to give some time slots when they are free, because these are all very busy surgeons. They have several hours of surgery, and then it ends in the very late in the day. So we need to actually be available at a time when they are actually receptive for that. And nurses training is it's a simpler effort, but you need to do it more frequently because the attrition rate is higher. Typically in a bigger hospital, there will be few hundred nurses. So when you train them, and then we are going to sort of lose them over an year or 1.5 years, again, you need to repeat the circle. So another way of looking at it is the department. So why a doctor has to use digital health, or what is in it for them as a group? So we try to give a bigger picture, saying that like your input, say in the hospital information system, is actually an output for somebody else or an input for another department. So we have to create that environment of a bigger picture, and where how important is their role in that. And then because they all need data, right? So any teaching hospital or anyone who is very interested in research is more particular about the kind of data. And if they can get a good quality data out of the system, which they can publish and present in the conference, there is an incentive to use. So we need to show them such incentives and also work together with them. That's what we do.
Je me tourne vers Cheikh Omar Bagui.
Yes, I would like to ask Sheikh Bagayugu. And concerning this degree, we've talked about the inter-university degree. Now, how do you feel about these capacity, these skills? Do you think that these skills exist? Now, do we have a very Anglo-Saxon view of things? That is to say, we have to change the organizations. We say that there are differences between different generations or not. Do you think that this is the vision which is the most pertinent one or not? Well, I think that it's true. This is the prevailing approach we have. The Anglo-Saxon approach is the prevailing one, because how can we find leaders? Now, it could be leaders in the Ministry for Health or in startups. It could also be leaders in our medical environment with a new view of things, a new vision. How can each one develop his new applications, be very innovative, and taking into account the needs of the users? And all this is part of the rules of the game. And I think that people have to be able to build the system. We should not give the impression to people that they wake up in the morning and that's it. We deliver a system and they have something which is available off the cuff. No, we have to empower them. And I think that with the Ministry for Health, there has to be a leadership which has to be based on a strong commitment. Now, I think that we have to try to bridge the different generations, because we have people working on the ground and we have to help them to change, but we also have to find strategies in terms of training, initial training, basic training in schools and health centers, so as to provide them with this e-health culture they probably don't have. And so this is a possibility for the future. Yes, you've just said a very important word, culture. You believe that there is no common culture for the healthcare, starting at governmental level, decision-making people and other people in the hospitals, for instance? Well, I must say that I'm very much concerned about this culture, because in our countries, we don't have this overall view on e-health. Other countries are more mature, like France. So we have a more silo approach. It's a silo approach, and we have to have a more systemic vision. And if you use many applications, you can bring all this together. But there are constraints that we have to work on all together, because we've been speaking of interoperability. Interoperability, it's not only communicating one with another. That means communications of the application according to the rules and the constraints that exist and which have been defined according to specific standards. So we really want people to understand all this. Question. Now, you said that you want to try to organize this in the faculties, in the medical faculty. Is this something you're doing for the moment? Answer. Well, we've started progressively in the Bamako medical faculty. In the second year, we start introducing the e-health issues. This is an overall introduction. In private faculties, I hope they're also going to embed this in their program in the fourth year. Now, they're not only speaking of information system, they're also speaking of other aspects of e-health. When you speak of the information, it concerns the health structures. As long as we don't include this in our programs, we won't be able to train people, and everything has to be more reliable, and everything is based on the patient. The patient is at the very heart of all this, and this is what we have to try to convey. Now, Alissa Toussal, Senegal has just started with a health strategy. There is a 5-year plan which was was launched last year and which will continue until 2023. Now, the advantage is that you are more mature, that you know what the difficulties of other countries have been. This can be helpful for you. Now, do the decision-making people in your countries are well trained and well informed concerning e-health? Answer: yes, we have validated our strategy plan for 2018-2023, and this has been a collective and teamwork. We have a good leadership. Our authorities, our health authorities are really committed. What do you mean? That means that everybody has been involved. It's been a collaborative approach. You had representatives of the ministries. What ministries, and how do you develop this inclusive strategy? Because everybody isn't interested by e-health. Answer: well, we have in-house, most of our stakeholders, health stakeholders, so at regional level, at central level, even in other areas, which are remote areas. We have telecommunication ministry, we have the health ministry, and we really are trying to build a partnership with the Ministry for Telecommunication because we want to develop a digital system. We also have been working with different commissions, committees for the regulation of telecommunications, and I think that everybody has to be around the table. Now, there's always a risk when you have so many people around the table, I suppose, because probably it's not always very efficient. Now, how can you manage with so many people? I mean, that's incredible. Answer: well, we know that we have to bring together all these people because when you want to build a strategy, you have to involve everybody. You have to involve the stakeholders who are going to help you to implement this. Because if you start elaborating a strategy and then when you want to implement it, these people who have not been there to start with are not going to be part of the story. They're not going to take the project on board. So I think that you have to have them at the very start. Yes, I know that this strategy is something you've done with different steps. So what about the milestones? Could you tell us more about this? Answer: we have three different stages. To start with, we extend the knowledge concerning e-health. We work with the representatives of the government. We have what we call a supervision committee, a technical committee, and we have different work groups who have different work parties. Then we have a second step, which is assessment, and then the implementation of our main projects, the projects which are a priority, and then we have to consolidate our strategy plan. Now, could you give us just a few examples of programs that you have developed during these three phases? There's also the health file of your patients. Yes, the priority is what we have concerning our patients, that is to say, the computerized health record of our patients and e-health. Now, what about these patients who have a specific medical record or file, which is on the internet? Well, we have a consultant which is helping us, and so as to have a mapping of what happens, because in some of our health centers we already have these internet tools. But when we start working with IC, we're going to have other people working together. Now, Jai Ganesh or Dr. Mustafa, I would like to ask you how to feel about this methodology. I know there's no ideal methodology. Either you have many people around the table or sometimes you have too many people around the table. But on the other hand, if you forget these people, then they don't feel involved and they're not going to take the project on board. So how do you feel about this?
I think the way to approach is keep people involved. Whether they would like to actually actively take part and be part of the journey, it's good. But at least we don't want anyone to put a spoke in our work. So it's good to actually keep people involved. And then later on, probably if they want to be, yes, they will continue, or at least we have done the informing role. So again, it depends on the context. Like, it's very difficult to have maybe a few hundreds but at least we need to have a representative of, say, for example, in a hospital, like, we usually involve the HOD and then maybe a couple of other people who actually show initial interest. Because again, when I mentioned about the user champion, it could be literally anyone who he or she who shows the interest to learn something new, and then probably able to actually spend little more time to actually share that or train somebody else. So we literally involve them. And HOD is a must if you want to actually get something implemented in the hospital.
Docteur Moustapha, votre sentiment un petit peu en termes.
What about you, Dr. Mustafa, when it comes from if you really want to implement the strategy?
It is, for me, learning from my experience. It is not one or the other. One of the first key steps that sometimes people forget is to do a stakeholder mapping. Not just to know who, everybody who is involved with that particular project, either for or against. That would be the first step. The second step, once you have your stakeholders, you need to map them out on a, goodness, what would it be? It's something like you determine their degree of influence and their support or not their support. So you sort of map it out, where they sit in this map of influence versus support. You know why this is important? Because the way you engage them will be determined on where they are on this map. So for example, if somebody is very influential but against you, it's no point calling them for a meeting. It has to be a one-to-one engagement maybe. Perhaps the other way of approaching that person would be through another party, through a proxy. Spin doctors, lobbyists are very good at this. This is what they do. And I just had an interesting discussion just last week at another meeting about the competencies of what the public health practitioner in this current era needs. It is no longer just epidemiology, about disease, about vectors. It is about leadership, about advocacy. You said about lobbying. I agree. Negotiation skills, being a salesman. It is a lot of things, and e-health as well. So I'm a medical doctor by training, but I find myself needing to learn more and more. So going back, so once you have your stakeholder mapping, you will determine at how you engage them. Is it just to inform? And this can happen at various stages. If you need to reach out to the most of your stakeholder, it can be just a consultation, right? And that can be towards the end. The problem with having a large group is that when you have a large bus, it's very difficult to move fast. Small van. A small van can move much faster, but at the same time, you compromise people being left out. So it is not a straightforward answer. I do apologize. You need to know your stakeholder, and your degree of level and frequency of engagement will depend. And I've learned it the hard way, unfortunately. So I'm at the stage of my career where I could impart most of what I've done. Things of not what to do.
Moi, si j'ai bien compris, je n'irai pas jouer ni aux échecs.
So if I understood well, I'm not going to play poker or whatever game with you, Dr. Mustafa. You're very good at planning strategies. Now, you've just said that we have to map our stakeholders, and I think that there's one of our stakeholders who's not always there is the patient. We're not always patient-centric enough. And Dr. Mustafa, how can you involve this very complex stakeholders? It's not always easy to know who we're talking about. We're speaking of the patient. How can we involve the patient?
Very, very important point, which I have been emphasizing more and more now. My background, I've said, is public health. I don't pretend to be a digital health expert. However, I think my input is very important because I was just having a chat with my colleague here. It's easy to see digital health, e-health as tools, but it's not just a tool, right? It is how you fit it around the surrounding system, but I had the problem with the word system. Once you say system, people think IT system in English. How you fit it around. So for example, like the Cushy baby, for example, I think the coolest thing about it is not the technology, but the very fact you figured out that, it fits with the culture. You can't be a digital health expert to figure that one out. You need to be a cultural expert, as it were. I think that's the most clever bit. So going back to your earlier question with regards to, what was that again?
Le patient. Comment inclure le patient au centre?
How can we include the patient? How can we be more patient-centric?
So we are embarking on a new initiatives. It's part of the Prosperity Fund Better Health Program. It's a development fund by the UK government. We managed to get quite a bit of money. So one of the scope of the intervention is not saying we already know what we want to do, but when we want to develop the e-health intervention, we must involve the patient or the population. In this case, it's more of the at-risk population. The scope for that particular project is non-communicable disease. It is outside of a healthcare facility. We want to take it out of the healthcare facility because I think you would agree with me, e-health provides that opportunity to take interventions, particularly for non-communicable diseases, out of a health facility because they feel well. An obese person don't feel sick, so they don't come to the clinic, right? Why do I want to come to the clinic? I'm fat, but I'm healthy. So e-health does provide an opportunity. But however, involving the patient, we had experienced that as well. Really, you get buy-in and they feel ownership. And it addresses the issue of trying to find champions. Because involving them, they are the champions now. They are the person who would talk about it. It's not me as the expert. And the example I always use actually is a more low-tech example. When we clinicians come up with posters, leaflets, let's say for eye care in diabetes, patients don't read the posters, patients don't read the leaflets. You know why? Because we never ask the patient what they want to learn, what they want to see. These are all developed by the endocrinologists, the family medicine specialists. So technicalities aside, and I'm learning as well, how do you engage people, behavior. So you would need not just being an e-health expert, but being a behavioral expert as well. So, sociologists, anthropologists. So not easy trying to be a good public health practitioner in non-communicable diseases in this day and age.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Moustapha.
Thank you very much. And I think that these 2.0 or 3.0 environment is something which is a considerable change of our organizations. And for the very last time, we're going to have questions. And this is going to be the last round of questions because we have champions here with us. And what about the first questions coming from Abidjan?
Voilà, ils sont avec nous. Alors, deuxième étape.
So, Abidjan, can you hear us now?
Alors, est-ce que vous nous entendez correctement, Abidjan?
Do you hear us? Well, the sound is still very bad. The sound is very bad.
Alors, peut-être, on va vous laisser régler le problème.
Okay, try to solve the problem.
Ah, ça y est, c'est parfait.
Oh, there they are. There they are. Okay. So, can you kick off with some of your questions? Because I suppose that you have experts, you have people. No, you can't hear. Sorry about that. There's really a technical hitch here. Okay, too bad. Okay, too bad for you and for us. Oh, you're having fun, I suppose. This is a joke. Oh, my God. Can you hear us? You hear us. Okay, so do you have questions for our panel members concerning the new capacities? We need the capacity building. Well, thank you. I would like to thank our panel members for And I would like to come back on the strategies you've talked about, especially the leadership strategy in terms of training. We've been concerned about this when we started implementing our own training modules. Many people were skeptical. They thought that this wouldn't work, that we wouldn't be able to find champions or leaders, but we were able to do that. And once we've done that here in Ivory Coast, well, it started working very well. We were able to develop the strategy. I just wanted to make this comment because I think it's important. But the other point I would like to mention is the turnover we have in our systems. That is to say, attrition, the attrition rate. Because once you train people, they leave 1 year or 2 years afterwards. And that's a problem. Our ministry should maybe make sure that we can maybe not give a bonus to these people, but try to help them feel more involved because they deserve it. Now, this is a question that I would like to ask to our panel members, maybe Jill. What about turnover? Because in terms of talents, in terms of capacities, is this something which is a problem for you in Asia? Do you have any kind of answer to this question?
Difficult, but this problem exists because AHIN has been involved in this country convergence missions for e-health. So we do see many times when the government changes or after a few years of capacity building, then the leads who are supposed to be the focal points of e-health in the country, they move on, or they move to a different department, or they move for higher studies, or so this is a problem. So I think it's also related to the governance and leadership. So irrespective of whatever changes that happen in the government and things like that, we need to have a mechanism where we need to sort of retain people who have been trained. So there are various ways of retaining people. At the same time, I think this is not just important that to offer some courses or training, but then like also form a career path for them. So if somebody has a particular role, a designation, a particular recognition for that particular designation, then I think retaining people will be probably easier, because if someone is, say, a doctor, he or she needs to learn something new, or they're being trained, and then that's okay. But then is there anything particular or any, in addition to the existing thing, are they going to get any kind of a recognition for the work or the extra efforts that they are putting in? So I'm aware of a training program happening in Sri Lanka where the medical graduates are actually trained and they are even sent abroad on an exchange project. But then like they're also giving them roles, specific roles in the government. So it's also important to create such roles or openings in the government for such people who are being given training. So that's one way of retaining probably.
Et maintenir les talents, on voit bien à travers ces témoignages que les questions se posent.
Yes, well, we see here that this is a real problem not only in the southern countries, but also in the northern countries. There's another question for Mumuni Maiga, who is in Burkina Faso, and who would like to know if there are new training, online training for e-health. Do we have, for instance, degrees? Are you going to have to go for a face-to-face training, or will you be able to have an online training? How do you feel about that? Well, I think that for our degree, inter-university degree, well, 80% of our training is online. But let's not forget that it's innovation and health practices. So you have the world practices, so you have to bridge both things. You just can't have theory, you also have practice. You have to have hands-on. And I think that when you train people, of course, you already train people online. Now, more questions in the room concerning this. I see here that we have someone who's going to ask a question there. We have also our internet users.
Ok, merci bien.
Yes, I was very interested by what our panel members have said, and I have a question concerning Asia and what you've done in Asia, because the turnover, what about the role of the ministries? We are very aware of the fact that the difficulty we have with e-health in our ministries is how can we keep our people, how can we keep the skills in-house, and how are the ministries doing something to help us for this recognition of these skills? And I think that there has been a proposal made which concerns the stakeholders, that is to say, not only will they, civil servants, that is to say that civil servants and some ministries will be able to have other roles apart from the one they traditionally had. That is to say, they can play the role of a consultant. Now, in Asia, do you have this kind of experience going on so as to keep these people in the long term? Could you answer, Professor Mustafa?
I can try within Malaysia's context. I think you raise a very interesting point. Is it worthwhile developing in-house or completely outsourcing? This is like the EMR question, right? Your data, is it in the cloud or your own server? In a way, it depends, because the answer is not that straightforward, right? It depends on the context. Our experience been, once you train people, they tend to try to go for greener pastures. It's a natural progression, especially in e-health. And my experience have been the work being done in the private sector is much more innovative than what we could do in-house. Often, if you see a lot of strategic e-health documents, they talk about PPP, public-private partnership. It is nice words, but implementation for me have been very problematic, especially in countries where you say PPP, but the processes leading to the PPP lack transparency, lack accountability. Like in Malaysia, it's a black box. Sometimes can, sometimes cannot. I also cannot answer why. Somebody asked me, that particular company A got in, but company B didn't get in. That kind of questions. So it is not an easy answer how you retain or whether you should retain. It is the same like the question being asked to Jai just now. How do you strategize for fast turnover? It is very context specific, and I think this is why networking such as this is very important, because it is context specific. We can actually learn from each other's experience. At least we know what not to do, even if we could not figure out what exactly to do, because we really don't want to do the mistakes. For example, like I have done, please don't go down that way kind of argument. Let's look at option C, D, and E. So just to recap, I feel personally in-house is not worthwhile developing because they will go out, they will migrate.
Je vais laisser la parole pour la dernière question de la journée. Auparavant, avant de...
Last question of the day before I give the floor. Bakari says, well, I don't know in which country, but he says for the digital record, I think it would be important to integrate the health worker from the onset, to integrate them in a co-design phase. This is something that we did in our country. And Marco in Italy says that e-health hopefully would be a positive contribution to universal health, and he would like to thank the foundation. Well, I have a comment before I ask my question. I think it's important to say that turnover in IT is also very high, and we have the same turnover in the north and in the south. We have challenges everywhere. Now, my question would go in the same direction as what the gentleman just said. When Ms. Sal and Mr. Bagayoko discussed about implementation, they discussed mostly the public sector and not the private sector. And unfortunately, I think it is not possible to build such systems without an involvement of a private sector, either from a financial point of view or a human resources point of view. So in their plan, do they integrate the private sector actor, of course, while aiming at good governance and good transparency? Well, I did not present a strategy, but I can give the example of Gabon. I supported a project where we had a private sector involved as well. They were involved from the onset, from the moment they designed the strategy, because again, the patient is going to go from the public sector to the private sector, and also traditional practitioners. So they also were involved. Of course, the role of the state is not necessarily to invest in a system that will be used privately, but the state has the obligation to create a framework for interoperability, a number of standards that will be used in the private and public sector. Aissatoussa, would you like to pick up on this question of public-private partnerships? Well, maybe I forgot to say that, but in our strategy, the private sector is a part and parcel of the entire project. So they have been integrated from the design phase, but they will be also integrated in the implementation phase. Very last question to our friends from Abidjan, if they can hear before we close this roundtable. Do you have a last question or comment before we close? Well, in fact, we are very happy to have been able to listen to that. We were very happy to listen to our teachers, Dr. Bakayoko, but also to listen from people from the ministry. So we're very happy because this degree, this inter-university degree, is going to help in capacity building, but it's going also to help in strategy design. So I think it is a two-pronged degree. From Bamako, Abidjan and Dakar, with also a very hands-on part. The very first vintage was a very good vintage, and we hope that with our future partners will help us be even more successful in the future, and we hope that we'll have even more funding to also enlarge the scope of this degree, because there's a lot of interest from people online, and we mentioned that at Bamako when we had our last meeting, and I think that it would be good and worthwhile for the second session to have more funding to include more people. Now, thank you. Call for funding duly noted. Thank you to a friend from the Ivory Coast. Thank you for being here, and goodbye to all of you. Thank you for being present for the entire duration. Thank you for being about the 300 connections that we've had so far. I would like also to thank our guests who've traveled the world to participate to this roundtable. Thank you ever so much. We do see that amongst the talents, for talents, all the questions are the same, whether you operate in the north or in the south. Now,